Good morning. I take it you can hear me. All right. Things are working. Well, welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday morning Dharma Talks. This morning we have our speaker, Tim Macejak. Got a little intro for him here. Tim's been involved in Zen practice for over 30 years. He began Zen practice at a teacherless sangha led by a group of experienced practitioners, and then practiced with a teacher at the Cedar Rapids Zen Center, followed by some years with an at-home practice. He has done a yearly retreat at Hokyoji since the early 90s and is currently chairman of our board. He is the author of the book Zen Unleashed, Everyday Buddhist Wisdom from Man's Best Friend. That was released in 2013, and I think there is a website where this little book is available. It's a very interesting little book. The dog is giving out the Buddhist teachings, and it's an excellent introduction to the practice for people who have no idea what Buddhism is about. The dog explains it. So, Tim, welcome. And let's see, you're going to need me to do screen sharing, and I can do that for you.
Yes.
Okay, that should be working.
Make sure. It still says for me, host disabled participant screen sharing. There we are. We're good. Okay. So my talk today is about harmony at the workplace and at home. And I got something brief I'm going to read here that's from Guide to Buddhism A to Z from the internet. Harmony is the smooth, pleasant, and non-contentious functioning together of two or more things. The Buddha often spoke of the need and also the desirability of harmony within and between groups of people. Some of the things contributing to what he called the progress of a society are the ability to meet together in harmony, adjourn in harmony, and conduct business in harmony. And I'll also add to that harmony is not just pleasant, like when people get along, but it makes our practice easier when harmony is happening. One of the reasons that there's the Buddhist precepts is when we follow the precepts, there's less chaos and drama in our lives. When there's less chaos and drama, it's easier to sit zazen, to practice. When there's all sorts of chaos going on, you can still practice, of course. It's just harder. So, I'm going to talk here about harmony at work. Some of you may be retired, but a lot of the things are relevant just in general. But we're going to start with the screen share. Dilberts. So here's a Dilbert cartoon. I'll just read here. Dilbert's talking to his pet rat. I can't sleep. Would you? Oh, the rat's talking. Cartoon. I can't sleep. Would you tell me a story? Dilbert says, once upon a time, there was a pointy-haired monster. He promised riches to the villagers if they could achieve his random objectives. The villagers worked long hours, but they were happy and optimistic. Suddenly, the evil monster cut their funding and hired the village idiot to be project manager. And that is how the villagers got trapped in meetings for all eternity. The end. And the rat goes, wah, cries, and rats cry when they hear about my life, he says. So, yeah, that was a pretty good description of how work often goes. I wanted to give 3 examples from not a cartoon. One's from my work at the post office. This is recorded, so I can't say too much, but one way the post office operates and determines staffing at all the different post offices is by these numbers. These numbers are expectations for how long certain things should take. So, for example, a tray of raw letters, a person by the numbers should be able to sort that tray of raw 2-foot raw letters in 15 minutes. I've worked at the post office for over 20 years. I don't think I've ever sorted a tray of raw letters in 15 minutes. It's always taken longer, 20, 25, 30. There's expectations for how many parcels you should be able to throw per hour. These expectations are the same no matter what size post office you're at. Some post offices only have 4 carriers, so there's 4 hampers to sort into, and the person sorting parcel hardly moves. In our office, there's 60 some carriers, and some of my fellow clerks have tabulated that they're doing 13 to 15,000 steps a shift while sorting the parcels. But for both offices, expectations are the same number of parcels, and if you say anything, they tell you it all evens out in the end, which of course it does not. Second example, this is something that happened to my wife where she was working. They were upset she was getting too much overtime. So they started having her punch out for 2 hours in the middle of her shift. Then she'd come back, and a few days later they approached her. She was still getting the overtime. They were kind of confused. And she said, well, while I punched out for 2 hours, nobody did my job. So the work was still there when I got back. And so, yeah, there's still overtime. Despite the logic of this, they still spent several months having her punch out in the middle of her shift in the hope somehow this would alleviate the overtime problem. So that first example, okay, that's the US government and a very large organization. Second example, an hourly paid worker, but certainly in a professional organization like a law office, they would be, exempt from some such things. But a friend of mine graduated from law school and got a job at a law office that argues for businesses to reduce their property tax rate. And he got his first case, and they handed him some papers. This is kind of the property values and what it's being assessed at. And he said, okay, so what do I do? And they said, well, you just go and argue that the taxes should be lower. And he's like, yeah, but how do I do that? And basically the answer was just figure it out. Not going to be any training. And he's like, the client would be horrified if they knew, they're paying big money. His first case, and he's got no training. Plus he's also just trying not to embarrass himself in front of the judge, it's kind of intimidating, your first case. But here's the thing. This law office is a successful law office. The place where Teresa worked, I'll just say one of the largest media research firms in the world, very successful. In the post office, when I Googled it, currently delivering 173 million pieces of mail a day. Not a month, a day. And last year, 129 billion pieces of mail. So despite this dysfunction, things are also functioning. And the image I want to bring up for that is this one. And you could ignore the D and the S. It's just impossible to find a drawing of this on Google. But this is a drawing of a wheel with the hub off center. So the wheel doesn't run very well. It wobbles. It's gonna not run most efficiently, but it's still gonna get where it's going. And I bring up this image, and many of you may kind of already know why. It's also the exact image that the Buddha used to describe suffering, that life is unsatisfactory. And this is the image he brought up, that things are never quite right, and it doesn't operate quite right, but life moves along. So if we connect these two images, what it suggests is that harmony at the workplace is not going to be created by fixing the wheel. That we're not going to create harmony by getting that hub in the center. That maybe for a brief period of time, everything will be great at work. Boss is all competent and respectful and workers all getting along, but it's not going to last very long anyway. All it takes is one new person to come into that group and throw off the whole balance of everything. If even that situation ever even exists, because my experience, it's usually always stays with the wheel with the hub off center. So how do we get harmony at work if we know hub's always going to be off center? Well, one of these ways is to be really aware of the stories that we tell. So I'm going to read something here. It's from an article called "Let Me Tell Me a Story." I don't know where I got it. There's nothing on here, but I'll say that just so I know everyone knows didn't come up with this myself. So Sam's boss, Connie, stops by his office, peeks in and asks him how it's going with the Acme accounts. Sam offers a succinct update and Connie moves on. As she continues down the hall, heading to her office, she tells herself a story. In it, she is a great boss, one that cares about her team. She shows them so by checking in to see how they are doing, thereby opening the door for them to seek her advice as needed. Meanwhile, back in Sam's office, he too is telling himself a story. His story features the villain, Connie, a boss who obviously doesn't trust her team enough to close a piece of business on their own. Someone who feels the need to insert herself into the process and micromanage. Two vastly different stories, both sprouting from the same seed. Perception is reality, and our perception is filtered by our own stories. So I want to tell another work story. Well, let me go first. Charlotte Joko-Beck tells the following that relates to all this. She says, imagine that you're on a rowboat. It's a brand new rowboat, and you're going out onto the lake, and it's foggy. But you're raring to try out your new boat, and you're boating along, and you suddenly see another boat through the fog coming toward your boat. And it's like heading directly towards you, and you shout, "Hey, watch out, I'm over here." And they don't pay any attention, which you're getting angry. Maybe they got music headphones on or something, which is just annoying. And you shout and shout, and then their boat hits your boat, and you are livid. And you go to yell at them, and there's nobody in the boat. It's an empty boat, and your anger completely disappears. And yeah, you're going to have to redo the paint job on your boat, but the anger is gone. And what she says is that our interactions with other people and with events are like running into an empty boat. But we don't treat the boat as empty. We treat as if there's a person in there who's ignoring what we're saying and doing whatever and crashing into our boat. When I think of this story, I immediately think of a time at my work. I'm a clerk. I work at nights, and occasionally I'll be bringing mail to the carriers, sometimes mail they don't expect. And when I do that, I usually announce my presence with the room service, because it just amuses me. And they'll respond sometimes with things, "I didn't order anything," or "Where's my piece of chocolates," or whatever. So one day I went to this carrier, and I had a very small amount of mail, 3 inches of letters. I mean, probably take 60 seconds to sort it. And I said, "Room service." And I don't remember exactly what she said back, but it was pretty nasty. It was like, "You do that on purpose to hurt me, don't you?" And I'm like, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'm just bringing you some mail." "Well, I don't appreciate that," and whatever. So I walk away and say, "Well, I'm not going to do that again." A couple days later, I'm bringing her mail, and she says, cheerful with a smile on her face, "You're probably going to say room service again." And I'm thinking, smile on her face. She realizes she kind of blew up at me the day before. This is a peace offering. I say, "Yeah, probably." She says, "Yeah, that's just the sort of nasty person that you are." I'm like, "Oh my God, I got sucker punched." I'm like, I forget even what I said. And then like another few days later, she's walking past me and she just says something out of the blue. I'm like trying to avoid her. And so I'm telling about this to a coworker, and I bring up the story of the empty rowboat. And she says, "Oh, that's a great story." And I say, "Well, I'm like 50% there. That's about as far as I can get." Because, my mind's just spinning this. It's just so irritating. But at the same time, I recognize intellectually she's an empty rowboat. And even the story of that empty rowboat's helping a little. But an interesting thing happens first, just by my coworker saying, "Wow, that's awful. She's acting that way to you." the boat gets a little bit emptier. That someone else is, telling me that I haven't done anything horrible, even though I know I haven't. And then she tells me she hears that there's some other carriers that have been saying things that she's been being kind of nasty to them too. And the boat gets emptier. And then I think literally like 15 minutes later, my coworker, Jan, comes back. She says, you know what I just heard? I heard her that her mother's dying, that it's taking a really long time. And the boat instantly becomes empty. Because my ego's out of it. My defensiveness is just gone. I mean, there's nothing there. So, we learn a lot through Zazen, how empty our stories are, how much we're always, we create these soap operas when something upsetting happens, and we spin it around in our head, and we're at the center of the story. Usually in those stories, we're the main character and we're in the right. Sometimes though, we're in the main character and we're in the wrong. It depends how your story is going, but they are just stories. And the more we recognize them as stories, the more we can create our own harmony in the workplace. Other ways to create harmony in the workplace is don't add to the fire, but instead be an example for others. Gossip at work, people putting themselves up by putting other people down. These are part of the Buddhist precepts. And we cannot participate in those. We can also keep in mind skillful speech. When we're going to speak, ask ourselves, is it going to help anything? What's the purpose of saying this? And it's some people at work have kind of gathered that I'm not big on the gossip. I think a few times when they were gossiping about a coworker, I kind of defended the person. So they've kind of left me out of it, out of respect. And they'll be gossiping off in the corner, and I'll tell you, I really, really want to hear what they're saying. Kind of almost like regrets, saying, but at the same time, it's better for the workplace. The less talking about your coworkers or about the bosses, the more harmony there can be at work. Another thing that can happen over work, there's kind of like a habit, pretty much anywhere I've worked, of complaining about work. I like working at the post office, but I don't say that out loud too often. It's kind of like being a teenager in high school and saying you like high school. It's just something that's most people around you aren't saying that. I say it every now and then, just as a practice, and depending on who I'm around. But criticizing work, complaining about work is kind of a pastime, national pastime. But there are two different ways to do it. One is very lightly, with humor. And I don't think harmony is really disrupted by this. I have a coworker named Joe, and he likes to be fired. I fire him every day. I go up to Joe and say, Joe, you're fired. And he says, thank you. And occasionally I jazz it up and say, Joe, you're fired. And he says, thank you. And says, but first, could you please take these 10 Express out and deliver a second route? And then when you come back, I'll fire you. And he says, oh, that's pretty much how it works, isn't it? So he jokes that it would just make his life so much better if he was fired. He doesn't really want to be fired. That's far different from, this place sucks. I hate this place. The bosses here are morons, blah, 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 blah. This type of complaining about work creates disharmony. There's no humor in it whatsoever. And other people feed on it. The more people do that, it's like a snowball. Other people start complaining about work. For people who are in charge, I'm talking a lot about jobs where I've worked where I'm not in management. But if you're in management, to watch your expectations. Over time, it's natural to become jaded, expecting or assuming the worst out of people. I've seen some of the nicest, most competent supervisors over time slowly morph into someone who's always suspicious and expecting the worst. And it's actually not a character flaw. It's a natural result of the job that they're in, because people do disappoint. People do fail to follow through on what they say they're going to do. People do lie. People do come up with excuses rather than have legitimate reasons for why something isn't done. But what happens as you slowly become jaded is the universe of unlimited possibilities starts to disappear. That in our Zen practice, in Zen teaching, in any given moment, there's an infinite number of possibilities that can happen next. And it's our expectations and karma that limit those possibilities. But we start to become jaded, we start to have expectations, and we start to apply filters to situations. So for example, suppose you have 4 different employees, and one of them, let's say something is done that's just kind of dumb. Not horrifically dumb, just kind of a dumb thing they did. And you might look at that first employee who's, if they did that, they've worked there a long time and you really respect them. And your thought is, I wonder why they did that. Maybe there's a reason they did it that way. Maybe you have another employee that's just an average employee and they do that same dumb thing. And you kind of roll your eyes and say, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. Kind of with a smile on your face. Third employee that does that exact same thing, and it's someone you're always having problems with, they're always calling in sick. You think, oh my God, that person is such a horrible employee. They're always making mistakes. Fourth person does it, and your response is, I bet they did that on purpose to piss me off. Exact same thing. Exact same thing has happened, but you've applied this filter based on your expectations of those 4 different people. And this filter, unfortunately, often ends up resulting in unskillful speech. It may be impossible if you're in management to avoid some feelings of becoming jaded over time because of the situation you're in, where you're having to hold people accountable. But nothing's going to destroy the harmony of a workplace more than voicing a lack of trust in someone when you're wrong. When you say, I don't think you were doing your job today because of blah, 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 and you're just wrong. It creates disharmony between the two of you, and that person tells everybody else. All these things I've talked about here. A key is mindfulness, and our practice of Zazen helps us with mindfulness. And we say, take the mindfulness from your Zazen mat and take it into the real world. Here's where it happens. That you're mindful of when you're telling a story. That before you speak, you ask yourself, is this going to help anything? When people are throwing sticks on the fire and complaining, are you mindful enough to see what's happening and not join in? Or to say something that might kind of remove a stick from the fire? So let me switch to harmony at home. And this is going to be a shorter section because home life is just way more complicated than work life. But I want to talk about a couple things. And one has to do with raising children. So how do we have harmony when being a parent? And my main thought on this is that having wisdom in this situation is just going to be more important than there being harmony. That the role of a parent is often to be the bad guy. And when you're the bad guy, you're making unpopular decisions or doing things that are unpopular, and the child is not a happy camper. And I have a friend of mine that with her teenage son, they were in the middle of an argument that was going on for a long time with yelling and stuff. And she finally went and locked herself in her bedroom. And what her teenage son then did was pound on her bedroom door and yell, "Come on, Mom, come on, what's the matter? Can't you take it anymore?" And she thought to herself, no, that's why I locked myself in the bedroom. I kind of thought that was obvious. But that's kind of what being a parent can be. So we try and have harmony, be a good listener, treat them with respect, but And I'll also say one thing that can help with harmony when being a parent is to watch our expectations. Just like if you're a boss at work, you're a boss at home, be careful of your expectations and not expect the worst from a situation. Situation just as simple as waking up a child in the morning to go to school. Some children do not enjoy being woken up in the morning and are not very friendly when they're woken up. But if you go in there with the expectation they're going to be awful, they're more likely to be awful, or you're more likely to, it's just more likely not to go well. Keep in mind that today might be a good day, and go in with as few expectations as you can. So if raising children is complicated, so is marriage. I don't really have a whole lot to say here because marriage is such a wide topic, but I did want to share kind of my experience over 20 years ago with marriage counseling. That our counselor, Patrice and I went to marriage counseling for a short while, had an approach, and all counselors have different approaches, but his approach had a lot of Buddhist wisdom in it, I think. So part of what happens in counseling is you kind of have a chance to air your grievances or things you're upset about without being interrupted. But then what he would have us do is repeat back what we thought the other person said. I mean, we're listening. It's not like we're daydreaming, but repeat back. And I'll tell you, it's really hard to repeat back what someone else said, especially if there's emotions involved at all. Sometimes it'd be 4 or 5 times before the other person would agree, okay, that's what I said. It usually wouldn't be like horribly off, but it'd be like, okay, that's 80% right, but you left out this huge thing I said. Or you're getting the words right, but the tone is all wrong, or whatever. And it really was eye-opening, especially when, like I said, when emotions are involved, that the other person, I mean, you can almost start going in expecting that I'm speaking here, but they're really not going to completely hear what I'm saying. And I have that same expectation for myself, that I know I'm not hearing completely what Teresa's saying. If I were to try and repeat back what she just said, she'd say, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. Or no, that's, there'd be something. So I think there's a great deal of wisdom in that our own filters and emotions and just maybe natural human inability to actually completely hear what the other person's saying. Then the other thing he had us do, we'd go through that, and then we'd have a homework assignment, and it was, we would come up with 2 or 3 things that we were going to try and do differently in the next week or month. I think it was a month. So it was not a homework assignment of what we wanted the other person to do differently. It was what we were going to do differently. In this counseling, there was no telling the other person what to do. We're not in control of the other person. I mean, there was at a certain point when we're talking about what's upsetting us, then we kind of come out what's bothering us. But when it came down to the solution, the plan, it was all about what we were going to do differently. And if we're both interested in making things better, it gets better. And what he said was, if the other person says they're not interested in doing anything, then you just have a choice. If the other person really isn't taking your grievances like they're anything, there isn't anything the counselor can do to fix that. It's then up for you. If they're just saying, I'm not going to change anything, but if you're in counseling, it seems like you both want to make things better. Or if you're just at home and you're married, you probably both want things to be better. But it was really nice, this whole idea of, and he never told us what to do, ever. The most he ever did was occasionally he would give us some information, statistics on something, and he'd facilitate the conversation. But it was a really nice tone that we each came up with, things that we were going to do, that I was going to do. And we've been married 27 years, so I think we're pretty good. The last thing I was going to bring up here before I finish, the Buddha talked a lot about harmony in the sangha, which I haven't touched on at all. But one of his themes was when meeting in a group, to begin the meeting, let's say there's a sangha that's kind of got some issue. When you begin the meeting in harmony. Conduct the meeting as much as you can in harmony, and make sure you finish in harmony. And a year or two ago, Teresa and I were at a wedding, and the couple had put out a little notepad where you were to write words of wisdom for the married couple. And so I wrote down my words of wisdom, and Teresa wrote down her words of wisdom, and they were both exactly the same. And we did not, compare notes. We both did the exact same words of wisdom, which was, don't go to bed angry, which really fits the Buddha's teaching of end the meeting in harmony. Look at the big picture. Despite the disagreements, end the meeting in harmony. So that's my talk. Thanks for listening.
See, Tim, you can ask for comments, or do you want to?
Yeah. Any comments, questions, anything? Share.
Back to the county. Well, I'll have a comment here. So, yeah, communication, harmony, it's quite difficult. Two things I try to keep in mind, and I'm not always successful with it, is assume goodwill, don't take anything personal. And I've found those two little things to be quite helpful. It gets personal sometimes, but assume goodwill. But the other thing I wanted to comment on is in-person communication, as Tim, you've been talking about, can be problematic, even when you're talking face-to-face. You can misread somebody, you hear part of what they're saying, but at least you're getting all these nonverbal signals. Body language is critical to communication. Gestures are really important, facial expressions, all of that. And, and then you step away from in-person communication. Well, we've got Zoom. And so we can still see somebody talking, but it's not the same as being in person, And then there's a phone call where you can't see the person, but you can hear their voice. You can, pick up little indicators of how that's going. And then you can get to email. And in an email, you don't get hardly any context at all. And, and then it can really go to hell if you're, making comments on a Facebook string or something like that. I mean, the communication just gets degraded so much because lack of context and misunderstanding is almost built into that. And it's challenging. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yes, I like the very nice, Carl, all of that, because the nonverbal stuff is important. And I also like the assume goodwill, because the assume goodwill helps take us out of some of our stories. Mary?
I really appreciated your talk, Tim. You brought up a lot of really thoughtful points, and I really appreciate it because it's a tough topic, what you're saying, because everybody can really relate to it. And I really appreciate, Carl, what you're saying about Zoom, email, and how about a text from your kid who can text for to 100 words per second in an argument, or anybody, and you're plopping along trying to respond, and that person doesn't want to talk at all. They just want to text back and forth. So our digital age really has brought, or you're in a meeting, you've never met a person in person, but you're really, you only know this person in the Zoom world. So you've never even had an opportunity to really meet that person and look at facial expressions, the way your body moves or gestures, and that's a real barrier to communication. But the last thing I want to say is that I'm not trying to diminish the years of marriage you've had, Tim. But my husband and I have been married 40 years. This coming 2022, and I will say we've gone to bed angry many times. sometimes sleeping in separate rooms. Sometimes it's taken us
Days.
Yeah, days. 3 days or two before we can come back and really figure out what's going on, because there's always a lot of stuff underneath, and our own fears and all of this. So we haven't been able to do that, although I think what we have had in any relationship, work or whatever, and that's commitment to the relationship. We both care, we care about the relationship. And if you have that, you can figure out a lot of stuff. If you don't care, then relationships are kind of over. So, but
Thank you, Mary, very much. Jim?
I had 2 marriages, and my first marriage, I lacked a certain respect, and I think that doomed the marriage from the start. And the second marriage, I had increasingly growing respect for that person, and that made for, I think, pretty much what Mary was talking about, with commitment to making sure things were going to be seen through. So that kind of, I don't know, just this idea of respect. So, but I have a few things from the workplace as well. One time I was working at a place that I really enjoyed working, and the software manager ended up quitting suddenly because of she was in a relationship with a person in the building, which was against ethical rules or whatever. So she just, okay, I quit. And then so it was time for reviews, yearly reviews, performance reviews. And so I met with the vice president of engineering for the first time one-on-one. I'd been in meetings with the guy, but I'd never been with him one-on-one. And he started the performance review by saying, working for a living, there's just something fundamentally unsatisfactory about that. And I thought, well, is this a trap? Is this a trick? How am I supposed to respond to this? But he was being very honest, and we ended up being really good friends, and meeting for breakfast with a few other people, even after he was let go, when they ended up laying off a lot of people on the board level because of financial problems. But he was just a very interesting guy, and he was saying, there's something just unsatisfactory about coming to work every day. And then I worked, the last place I worked was really the best place I ever worked. And there were a lot of people who, it was a very complicated situation, very complicated product. And there was really very talented people in the software department and also in the IT department and the department that worked the servers, maintained the servers during the day as processes went through. But the test department was really weak. And so it was a kind of a fun thing for people in the software department to kind of rag on the test department not being very good. And the lead software guy finally said, we can continue to complain about this and have fun complaining about the test department, or we can, help them and help them improve because they want to do a good job. And so I was so impressed with him and so impressed with that attitude of like, yeah, we're having fun doing this, and but there's a better way to go here that would improve everything. So that turning things around is a really, and I think that's out of respect as well. Is really a nice twist on things. There's just this inherent thing about wanting to, kind of bond with your team by putting other teams down. But there's even better thing to just increase that whole thing, increase the size of the team. So that's what I want to say.
Very good. Thank you, Jan. Looks like Kyoku, maybe. Right. Carl, they're still muted at the Zendo. Oh, I guess they need it.
There we go. So I just wanted to share the benefit I received from learning about nonviolent communication, which was a way of saying many of the things you're talking about, Tim, in kind of a formal system Marshall Rosenberg created. And the first starting point is communication is for the purpose of connection. So the first question I've learned to ask myself when I'm not so wrapped up in my viewpoint that I'm blind is my purpose in this communication connection? Because often it can not be. It cannot be. So that question alone is very interesting. I once taught a class about anger, and I asked people to identify some person in their life with whom they have a difficult relationship. They consider it a difficult person. Who's a difficult person for you? And it was all over the board in terms of the roles, but the next thing I asked was, what's your story about this person? And when you communicate with them, do you think of them as the enemy, or do you think of them as somebody with whom you're trying to connect? And it was absolutely amazing that one question seemed to really shift things for people. So much so that 6 months later, I would hear stories from them about how different a particular relationship was for them. So I just recommend that. I have a tremendous kind of continuing project in terms of right speech about really tuning in and listening and not using it as a vehicle for making myself think better about myself, because it's really not. So that's really all. Just that one question. Am I saying what I'm saying in order to connect?
Thank you, Kyoko.
It's working. Hello, can you hear me? I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yep.
Oh, good. Yeah, thanks for the talk. I was reminded of the what they call the short timer syndrome. That's where if you're at the end of your contract, the temptation is to finally tell everybody what you really think of the organization. And I was in that situation and was advised to resist that, and I did. And the outcome was that it was much easier to leave the job. It was much easier to walk away from it. But your story of the boat, the empty boat. My son he left Minneapolis to live in LA for a couple of years, and finally just had to walk away from it. Traffic and everything just got to him. And he was taking an Uber to go to the house to pick up his bags to then go to the airport to come back to Minneapolis. And he encountered this thing, I guess it's prevalent in LA, called road rage, where someone followed in a truck the Uber driver back to my son's place of residence. And my son thought that, the individual in the truck was so outraged that it felt like a fight was going to take place or something. And my son had to be the one to step out of the car and tell the truck driver that the Uber driver was deaf and wasn't aware of this guy coming after him. And that reminded me of the boat, the empty boat. But I wondered, at some point you mentioned that the boat got even emptier. Could you run that by me again?
Yeah, well, for me, because of this how frustrating and stressful the situation was at the beginning, I'd say the boat was only 50% empty. That was my point, that the story was helpful, but that I was still spinning all sorts of thoughts about this person that I worked with, and just imaginary conversations, and all that type of stuff. But the story of the empty boat helped calm that down. But then the boat got emptier, the less my ego and defensiveness and my story was at the center of things. Mm-hmm. So again, when I got reassurance, I hadn't been like the world's biggest creep. It got a little emptier. And then when I heard she was treating other people poorly, it got emptier. And then when I found out her mother was dying, then it was just empty all the way.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, I guess that's all the comments. I believe Kyoko can maybe back me up on this, but on August 8th, we had a Dharma Talk on Sunday by Paul Shippey, and I believe he was talking about nonviolent communication. And was that correct, Kyoko? Not just nod your head if that's, yeah. Anyway, yes. that talk is available on the website, Paul Shippey, August 8th, I believe. Anyway, let me see. I've got some announcements here, but thank you, Tim, for your talk, and everybody for your comments. All right. Well, this. Huh. Well, this isn't what I want at all. I got a piece of paper here. I want the schedule.
Aaron is speaking next week.
Aaron is speaking next week. All right, Aaron.
Yeah, Aaron from Kennewick, Washington.
Aaron with an E. All right. And that's actually, thanks for that, because that wasn't the information that I was looking for. It's the activities at Hokyoji, but it's going to be nice to hear you, Aaron. So I look forward to that. We have the men's retreat is starting at Hokyoji on Thursday, I believe. Is that correct?
You're correct.
Yeah. And then, I'm disorganized this morning, excuse me, but yes, the men's retreat is starting on Thursday. We've now got, I think we're going to have a good 12 people there, including the teachers. So that's going to be very nice. After that, I believe we have the weekend board retreat at Hokyoji. We're going to do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday long-range planning, short-range planning kind of deal. And then after that we've got two work weekends coming up. There's a Caring for the Land, where we push back the jungle kind of deal. And then there's the just the fall work weekend where we're getting ready for change of seasons. We got to set the Zendo up for the wintertime, etc., like that. Anyway, so those are nice opportunities for people if they want to come. What else do I have here? I think that is all that I've got today. So thanks so much for joining us, and hope to see you here next week. So, thank you.
Carl, did you want to do the 4 vows to close?
I'll do the 4 vows. Thank you, Kyoko. Like I said, I'm just barely here this morning. So, do we do a bell? Yes? Justin. All right. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Have a good day.